Welcome to the 11th and final lecture in the lecture series that I'm providing on the topic of practical advocacy skills for social justice advocacy, learning from the disability experience. My name is David Lepofsky, and I am a visiting professor of disability rights at the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa. In this last lecture, I wish to talk to you about some practical skills for mounting and practical measures for mounting a media campaign. In the 10th lecture, I talked about the structure of the media and what makes something newsworthy and some general ideas about putting together a story. Now we're going to drill down more deeply. One option I've mentioned is doing a news conference. What is a news conference? It's frankly just announcing an event where you're going to announce something. It could be done anywhere. You can involve whoever you want. There are no speaking. There are no rules. There are expectations, however, for the media that it will not be too long, half hour maybe, something that will, though they can go longer, but something that enables them to come, get the news, and then move out from there. Why do a news conference? Well, there's several reasons. The first is just plain efficiency. Rather than doing the same interview with a bunch of reporters, one after the other, saying the same thing, being able to say it all at once. The fact that you do a news conference, it itself can be a newsworthy event. Yes, in the last lecture, I talked about the importance that the fact that the media don't cover news, they cover events. A news conference can be the event that they cover. It can create an interest, attention, focus attention, and as you deliver it, can include all the ingredients they need to make a story. It makes there are other reasons to do it. By doing it, it makes your advocacy efforts visible to your own supporters, whether it's live streamed or archived online. It lets your supporters see what it is you're saying on behalf of your constituency. It also makes your advocacy efforts visible to the political parties. So, I mean, when you call a reporter and give them a story, that may never get to air, or it may just be one little blip of a story. But if there is a news conference, it is an event that you can use to focus the politician's attention. For example, you could take the link to the online archive of the news conference if you video record it and send it to each of the politicians' offices so that they can each watch it even if they're not there. It provides further a platform to provide individual interviews. In a case where you've presented a compelling story and a number of reporters are there, they may ask questions in front of everyone, but it's not unheard of for them to ask you if you could just step out and individually go on camera and answer questions. Why do they want to do that? Why not just use what's in the mid-center in the Q&A of the news conference? Well, they may want to do that because they want specific footage that no other news organization has access to, with their reporter on camera and you on camera. As well, a news conference can provide a way to illustrate a problem. You can choose to do the news conference at a newsworthy location so that the visual backdrop, we're doing a news conference about problems with provision of education to students with disabilities. Stand on the sidewalk in front of a school so they can not only hear what you have to say, but they've got the school as the visual backdrop. The other advantage of a news conference, and this can be a huge advantage if it is live streamed and archived online, is it enables news organizations to cover your news conference even if they don't attend it. Once upon a time, they really had to come to the event to be able to cover it. But now, with the benefit of live streaming, I've done any number of news conferences where a news organization, that a TV network or whatever that's been too busy, they've got a limited number of cameras, they send them in other directions, and I watched the news that night, and there they are covering our event. The reporter who's doing the narrative is using our news release and so on, but they never were there to ask me or our group any individual questions. If you do a news conference where you have multiple speakers, if we're talking about disability education, you have a couple of parents there talking about the kind of problems they've faced, then reporters get the advantage that all in one place, they can hear what the problem is, they can hear from the community advocate, and then they can speak to the individual victims of the social justice failure. They get it all in one place. And therefore, it is an opportunity for them to, because the story is easier for them to do, they're more likely to cover it, especially in the world of a shrinking media with fewer staff and time pressures. Now, there is a risk when you do a news conference. There's a risk that no one shows up. No reporters come. Even if that's the case, I don't sweat it, because first, as I just said, you can have news organizations cover it who never were there, even the same day. Second, you can use the news conference to build coverage for later in the week or the next week if no one picked up on it. And third, the archive is still a public record of the problem you're facing and what you're calling for, which can be referred to and relied on weeks or months later. Finally, when answering the question, why do a news conference? Sometimes it can be an effective way to flush out an answer that you can't get from the government. Just a couple of weeks before this recording, I was involved with a news conference at which a number of organizations were trying to get the government to come clean on what they're doing about a particular issue. And we were pressing that they should do A but not B. And the government decided to do a contrary news conference an hour earlier in an effort to distract reporters from our event so they'd go to their event, not ours. It's not an unusual government strategy because there are only so many cameras and and journalists to cover these things. It actually worked to our advantage because at the prior, earlier government event, the Premier of Ontario and the relevant minister, the Minister of Education, were actually asked were confronted by journalists. What do you say about what's going to be said at a news conference today at 11? They answered. They couldn't hide from it. Having their contrary event or their distracting event didn't enable them to escape from our issue. And then by the time we held our event, reporters told us what the Premier had said and gave us a chance to respond. It can serve as an effective way to flush an answer out of the government, whether you like it or not. What the answer is, getting the answer may have real value to you. Let me turn now to the timing of a news conference or a news event. Best to aim for a slow news slot. Pick a time when there is just not that much news going on. You can't fully control for this. You could have something all planned and then something horrible happens and it distracts the whole media away from you. You have to be nimble enough to be able to reschedule if that happens, if it's possible. But here are some practical illustrations. If you want to do a news conference and a media blitz of any sort on a topic related to the government, it's worthwhile to wait till the legislature is not in session. It's either in recess for the summer or it's on a break. Why? Because when the legislature is in session, the Queen's Park reporters, if you're in Toronto, are all busy covering the parties and what's the latest big news on the floor of the legislature. and what are the biggest scandals that are getting attention or whatever. On the other hand, if it's when the politicians are all away from the legislature, like in the middle of the summer, there's less political news, there may be no political news, and therefore there's more window for your story to get picked up. Summer for me for this kind of thing is absolutely best, or the first week of January, or late in December. Mid-December, after the legislature has risen, if that's who the subject of your story is going to be, I kind of like that time because not only is the government finished announcing all the major stuff they think they got to announce before they break for holidays, but the journalists are looking for stories to run over the period of time between Christmas and New Year's, when a lot of reporters are on holidays. So if you give them a story the week before that, it's something to make, record, and then keep in the bag for the news outlet to use while the holiday is on. Another time that's useful is if you're doing political, a story related to Parliament or a legislature, is pick a week when they are in recess. Even when a full legislative session is on, they may take a week off from time to time, where each of the members of the Parliament or the legislature go back to their constituency offices in their community. Again, the Queen's Park Press Corps or the Parliament Press Corps have fewer stories to cover. I don't do stories on a weekend. If it's vital, I might, but I avoid it at all cost, because news organization staffs are way down on the weekends. Similarly, I don't do stories at night if I can avoid it. Sometimes it's inevitable, you have to. But nighttime, again, news outlets with limited staff have less staff. People went home. As well, there may only be one TV camera for a TV station. If it's distracted because there's a shooting somewhere or whatever, then you're out of luck. I prefer morning to afternoon. Again, not something you can assure, but the advantage of that is this. By the time of afternoon, there's been stories breaking all morning. Reporters may well be all tied up. On the other hand, if you do an event in the morning, like at 10 o'clock, a news conference, it's before everything all gets percolated and heated up. And it gives the news organization the maximum amount of time to take whatever they got from the news conference or news event, get feedback from the government, do other legwork they got to do, and then get the story to run that day. Monday morning to me is, on average, the best time. It's when, one reporter told me this, it's the best time because they come in Monday morning after a weekend off and their desks are cleared and they're waiting for a new week and what the stories are going to be. If you can get in then, you have an advantage. If you do something on Thursday, you risk that there's been stories that have been breaking over the week and they are evolving and they spill over. Similarly, Friday afternoon is the worst. I've been known to call a reporter that I have a relationship with and say, hey, we're thinking of doing an event on so-and-so date. Is there any big news happening that day? Find out if there's going to be a government budget released or some other major event, some political convention, something that's going to distract from your ability to get coverage. I mentioned before, and I want to just drill down a bit into the chess game of government responding to a news event. Not if they see that your news event looks like it's going to have some punch to it, and they don't want it to get any attention, they might, as I gave in the illustration before, schedule a rival event, either at the same time or slightly earlier, and if they're, from their perspective, hopefully enough of a distance that people can't drive from one to the other. I happen to think this is silly, but some politicians or their staff think it's a good idea. I think it's silly because reporters are onto it. They get the idea. They know what they're trying to do. It's silly because news events are increasingly live streamed. So even if you go to one, the government distraction event, they're going to be able to watch live or archived the event that's they're trying to distract you from. It's also silly because it because reporters are onto it. The government's actually signaling to reporters that there's something valuable in what you folks have to announce, and that they're worried about it and they want to distract. And finally, it's silly because of the chess game I described earlier. It can actually backfire. If we had just held the news conference I described, and for which the government did a rival event an hour early, if we just held our own and they had not held theirs, here's what would have happened. Reporters would have watched our event. They would have, if they were interested in covering the story, they would have emailed the government and said, "Do you have a response?" And either they'd get a response that would simply be read on air, or they would get no response at all. But what they wouldn't get is a politician on camera being hit with a question and having to figure their way around it and be extemporaneous and possibly messing it up. What happened in this case, by holding that earlier event, reporters were able to cover both. Reporters were able to ask the premier the question that they otherwise might want to hide from, and they got actual footage of his response, not just a well-crafted text by their comms people at the premier's office. What do you do before you do a news event? What's the preparatory thing? Well, first you've got to figure out what the story is, and you've got to figure out whether you're going to present it by a news release or hold a news conference. That is, the news release is just send out the story. Here's the story, and see who calls you back to want to do interviews with you, or hold a news conference, or whether you want to stage some community event, or whether you want to just plant the story with one news organization and give them the exclusive. It could be a combination of those. One strategy, if you're going to do a news conference and you want to get a lot of media attention, is you pick one news organization, preferably a newspaper, and give them an exclusive the night before, so that morning there'll be an article in the paper saying, later this morning there will be a news conference and the government will be blasted about X, and so on. That lets other news organizations know it's newsworthy and may generate more turnout from the media to your news conference. If you want to get that exclusive, you need to call news organizations that you might offer it to well in advance, because a reporter needs to check with their editors over whether they're going to take it or whether they won't. What you do when you do an exclusive is frankly tell them, here it is. You can have it if you release it if you do a story by Monday at 9 o'clock, it's all yours exclusively. But if Monday by 9 o'clock, if you haven't released it, we're going to be offering it to the public, to the news, by news release to everybody. So if you want the exclusive, you got to exercise your choice of it by then. I've had reporters say, yeah, we like it, or I've had reporters say, you know what, shop it around, we're not going to take it. If you're going to do an event of any sort, news conference or otherwise, and you're not doing an exclusive, before the event, what's a good strategy is to issue a media advisory. Now, what's the difference between a media advisory and a news release? I'm going to talk more about the content of the news release in a minute, but a media advisory is much shorter. It just says, this group is holding a news conference Monday at 10 o'clock at the Queen's Park New Media Studio on the topic of X, and maybe a paragraph to sort of tantalize them about why it would be interesting. It might say, the government, these disability groups are going to announce a bold new strategy to tackle X, but not say what the strategy is. Try to get them interested. A news release, in contrast, is a full statement of your story. After you launch an event, or do a news release or whatever, there's a sequence of events that you can anticipate may happen. The first is immediate coverage, immediate uptake that day. It gets, if there's interest in it, it gets reported on over that day or over the next 24 hours, if you're lucky. The next is round can be follow up on hard news stories by radio interview shows calling you up all around, or public affairs interview television shows where they want you to talk at greater length about it. You do the event, there's an article saying disability group demands X, and then there's an afternoon drive home show where they say, well, tell us more about X, and we want to know what the problem is, and so on. The next thing that could happen, it's rare and it's totally the jackpot, is if a newspaper decides not only to cover the story, but to write an editorial about it. In that event, it's the newspaper going beyond just saying, here's what happened, but saying, expressing the opinion that the government is wrong, the government should do more, this is an injustice, and so on. I call that the jackpot, not because you have to have it, but because if you get it, it has a strong, it puts strong wind in your sails. When we get editorials, I will then aggregate how many previous editorials we've had in an AODA update, so people see that we've had a paper covering something for a long time. If we get an editorial in support, then the next time I want to submit an op-ed to that paper, a guest column, I'll argue to them that this story, this op-ed I'm doing, is consistent with your editorial policy. You've done an editorial on this, and I'm building on it. Now, what happens if you get none of this? Don't sweat it, because if it's not reported, you can always try to revive it later that week, the next week, whatever. If it happened to be a big news week and nobody covers it, I've gone to news organizations the week later and talked to them about, hey, we did a news conference last week where X happened, nobody's covered it, and it's a week later and the government still isn't answering what we need. So it's got a kind of present immediacy sense to it. And that's a way to try to, and I've seen this happen a week later, a couple of weeks later. You don't just give up on it because you don't get immediate coverage. Now, may I turn to drafting a news release? How do you do it? I use many of the same skills and approaches that I use when I write a factum for court, a brief for court. Not because I don't write in legalese and I don't cite court cases and do the same kind of thing, but my strategy in writing is very much the same. A press release should read like a news story, the news story you want reported. It should have a headline. It should have the body of the report should be written in the way a news story is. The first paragraph in a news story should give you the who, what, where, when of the event or issue that they're covering or incident that you're covering. So the opening statement should give it all. So that if they read the headline, it should make them want to read the opening paragraph. If they read the opening paragraph, it's written in order to get them to read the rest of it. In the olden days, it was, especially when we were sending these out in print, you tried to get you aimed to get your press release on one side of one piece of paper. I may be wrong in this, but for my purposes, I write a longer one if I think I need to say more. I don't make it longer unless I have to, but I want to write it so that they've got all the information, they can pick and choose the parts they want, and if they find I say it so well that they couldn't say it better, I love seeing when our turns of phrase turn up in the actual story. What are the ingredients? So there should be a letterhead that tells them who you're from, and with a hyperlink or whatever to a website to show that you're authoritative. it should say press release or news release. It should say for immediate release, unless it's embargoed. Embargoed meaning you're stating that you can have this, but you can't report it to a certain deadline that you state. The first paragraph I've talked about. Then in the body of the text, what I will usually include is more description of the situation that we're addressing, and I will include quotes, at least quotes from one person, might be me if it's my coalition, or if it's a group of 3 organizations issuing doing a joint news conference, you have a quote from each of them. And the quote should include the statement and include the name of who's saying it and who they are, president of, chair of, leader of, whatever, to ensure that the reader gets that they are credible. I write it in plain language on the assumption that the reader knows nothing about the story. I will embed in the story, this is where getting away from hard copy paper is phenomenal. I will embed hyperlinks in the story to support facts. The minister made a statement denying this problem, and embed a hyperlink. So if the reporter wants to see, did the minister really say it? Click, bang, they're there. And this is the 3rd time this has been raised. It's community groups have pressed it in 2021 and 2022, hyperlinks to the demands, whatever it may be. So first the reporter sees it's credible, they're presumptively hopes it's credible as long as those links are legit. But also you save their time, you're doing their work for them, you're proving that there is documentation to support you. In my text, I will set out our injustice, what needs to be done about it, but I will also try to anticipate what the government's response to be and provide a retort. If it's about an education accommodation that we're seeking to get added, I anticipate the government's going to say, we're spending more money than ever on special education. So I will say something like, if the government again claims in response to this that they are spending more money than ever before on special education, we would respond that and then give your answer. And that is really helpful, because if the reporter doesn't get back to you after they get the government's actual statement, they've got something they can still quote. If there are key documents, I will include them. If it's an open letter that we have released today where 20 organizations call for X, I'll say, see below. And I'll have the open letter with the list of the organizations right on it so they can see without having to even click that the information is there. What is my writing strategy beyond plain language and so on? First, as with all my writing, and I mean all my writing, whether it's legal writing for court or writing a brief or any of this kind of stuff, I have 2 separate activities, writing and then editing, and I never do them at the same time. If I try to write a sentence and then edit it, I'll never get past that sentence. I write the whole news release. I don't care if it's longer than I want it to be. I just get my thoughts on paper. And if I'm not sure where a point should be made, it could be made in 2 places, I make it in both places. And then I go back and I edit. Once I have a first draft, once it has everything I could say that I think I want to say, and it's actually 4 pages long, when I want it no more than 2, I go back and I edit. And I play a video game where every word has to justify itself to me, and I want to delete as many words as possible. And then it trims down, and we end up with a product that will be as good as I can provide. And as I'm going, when I did my first draft, I may have a further information section. If you want to see key documents, here's a list of 4 of them. But I may decide as I'm editing, I don't need them all, or maybe I should add another couple. And that can really help. When writing the headline, a headline should say it all if it can, or at least say enough to grab attention. Um, the have you ever read newspaper articles where there's a headline and you read the story and the headline doesn't say what the story actually ends up saying? It promised more than the content was. At least some reporters have told me that happens when the headline writer is not the story writer, and they just get it wrong. I write my headline last after I get it all, the context or the whole document, or at least the first draft written, because the headline comes out much more quickly in my mind and much more punchily if I've actually got the whole message laid out. Sometimes I use a question in the form of a headline. Will the government do blah, 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 needed to do blah, 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 in response to new vigorous campaign by tenacious disability advocates, ? So I'm creating a sense of interest by asking a question that we might want to read more to find out the answer to. When I'm writing, and especially when I'm editing, and when I'm all done, I keep in mind my audience. What's this going to sound like to a reporter? We're busy trying to figure out how to just put the words on the page and how to make the argument as persuasive. I then sit back and go, okay, if I'm a reporter who knows nothing about this, will I get it? And then I have to read it through the eyes of the government. How's the government going to react to this? Is there anything in there they can shoot at and claim is overstated or misleading or incomplete? It's hard because, to answer all of that and prevent all of that, you might have to write something that's way longer than a page or two. But I need to go at least worry about that. Are there any landmines? Is there any turn of phrase that is just, it may be accurate on its face, but it may be a little misleading? Not intentionally, but it may be. I want to fix that. I also read it through the eyes of my supporters. Are they going to be, again, looking at this going, good on you, I agree, or is it going to be more of, you're going too far or you're not going far enough? I want to test it against all those things, but if I do that while I'm initially writing, I'll never get anything written. If I do that while I'm editing, I'll never get anything edited. I do it after it's all done. I like using action words. Avoid using the passive. It eats up too many words. And action words are ones that grab our attention. I avoid using inside baseball jargon. I avoid, and I can't say I've done this 100%, there are times I haven't. I avoid getting wrapped up in internal government procedural stuff. We may think it's a completely brutal injustice, but reporters may find their eyes are glazing over. They want a substantive injustice. Now, it may be we never got a chance to be heard, maybe a procedural point that's strong enough to make, but be aware that is at least something you've got to struggle with, whether you need to be really convinced that you want to raise the procedural things before you do. I like to use strong adjectives, not excessive ones, but strong ones. I don't want to deflavorize it, make it so bland that it's you yawn while you're reading it. I want it to be gripping. When you're writing these, especially when you sit down at the end and read it over, just imagine someone reading it who reads hundreds of these every day. You want yours to stand out. You want yours to kind of rise above the others. Now, it's a bit hard because you don't know what the others are saying or who they are, but everything from making sure that it's formatted right and there are no typos, make sure the font isn't so hard to read that they're squinting. But other than that, just generally think about, hey, what if I listen to the news this morning and what are the big topics, what will make this be a not more of the same, but something very different and interesting? What do you do with quotes? What are the purpose of quotes? Well, for me, quotes are just making part of the argument. I know we have statements that are attributed to a speaker, but frankly, I could easily strip off the quotes and just have those statements in there without anyone being quoted. Unfortunately, a news story just looks a bit boring like that, so I write the story I want, but when I get to the point of quotes, I'm making points that I think just help move the argument along, even if they weren't the case. I then try to associate the quote with the individual speaker based on who is a credible voice. When we do a news release for a news conference on needs of students with disabilities, if it's a parent who's giving the quote, and they're speaking from their experience as a parent, I want the quote to not say parents are mistreated or parents are very stressed or whatever. I want it to be we parents all experience such blah blah blah, whatever it is, such trauma or difficulty, whatever it is, so that we are making the point we would otherwise want to make, but we are using the fact of this speaker as kind of vouching for it. How do you plan for the government's response? I've already talked a bit about it, writing it into the news release, but we have to be ready for a reporter fulfilling their ethical duty to be balanced and fair and to get the government's response. I have offered, listen, if you get response from the government, you want a response from us, here's what, feel free to give me a call. I'm happy to comment on it. Some do, some don't. I will tell them if I can anticipate what I'm expecting the government may say A or B. I can tell you if they do, here are my concerns, or here's our response. Often the government response is not a direct response why what we're asking for is somehow bad or unwise or something, but is a distraction. They just don't want to do what we want to do. They want to change the channel. I equip reporters if it's a distraction. One of the big ones is we give more, I've mentioned before, in the special education context, we give more money than ever before to special education, which I'm now inclined to answer, you know what? Inadequate plus $1 is still inadequate, even though it's more. And they get that. Governments, you have to be ready for the fact that they kind of get dulled to government responses. And if they've seen a pattern of a particular form of cynical government response, I have found reporters, you may think it's very newsworthy because it's appalling and it's clear and it's documented, but you've got to be ready for the fact that a reporter, having seen a lot of this, may be a little more understandably jaded about it. There are times when the government response can very much assist you in making a news story. So in 2005, the Ontario Legislature unanimously passed the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. It was going to it required the government to lead the province to become accessible by 2025. In the last part of 2024, we were feeding to the media, the story that the deadline's approaching and we're nowhere near there. The government, the CBC, asked the Minister for Accessibility, Raymond Cho, to respond to the concerns about this. And do you think, we are on schedule and so on? And he has very rarely answered media inquiries. His ministry may send things out, but rarely has he given interviews from what I've seen. And he ended up, however, saying, well, I think it's working. And he explained what he thought was working. Well, Minister for Accessibility in a province full of barriers says, I think we're actually What are you complaining about? It's working. Itself became like a story. In fact, we could take that quote and do further releases or media efforts referring to that. The other thing you need to know about when it comes to a reporter's duty to be uh, fair and balanced is if you're advancing something new, they may feel that they, aside from quoting the government for response, see if they should quote any contrary views. So when we started in 1994, 1995, advocating for a new Disabilities Act in Ontario, and this was not a big thing within the disability community yet. Most people didn't know about it. We were a fledgling disability startup, as I described in the second lecture in this series. And a reporter who's going to cover us was approached by someone who wanted to, with a disability, wanted to argue that we shouldn't have a Disabilities Act. And so you'll see a story, you can expect a story that says, people with disabilities organizing to demand blah, blah, blah. They say blah, blah, blah. But the view is not consistently held in the disability community. So-and-so said they don't really think it's a good idea, etc. And that is always a risk because there are people who will go to the reporter and if they have strong views to the contrary, for whatever reason, they'll raise it. How do you deal with this? Well, my view is the first step is approach that person and talk to them and find out what they're all about. And you may find that they have legitimate concerns that are worth talking about and see if they're involved. You may not, you may just disagree, and that's fairness too. But make your case and see if they have an answer. Do you agree we face barriers? Do you agree they're not going away now? Do you agree existing law hasn't solved it? So we want a better law. In one case where there was a person doing this, they said, no, what we really need in their view, this person was not a law student or a lawyer, is we need a constitutional amendment to protect equality for people with disabilities. And I said, we have one. This didn't change them, and they actually were still telling a particular reporter this. So eventually, the reporter asked me, what do you have to say to so-and-so? Because they are being pulled by the ethical duty, the professional obligation to be balanced and fair. And I said, I talked to the guy. He actually doesn't dispute that there's these barriers. They haven't gone away. His whole argument is we need a constitutional amendment. Can I show you Section 15 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms? Like, I know about this because I was involved in the fight to get it. Well, eventually the media stopped quoting this fellow. A couple of years later, when we had a major shadow public hearing at the Ontario Legislature in 1998, which I talked about in an earlier lecture, there was all sorts of people getting up speaking about why we need a Disabilities Act. This one individual got up and said why he didn't think we needed a Disabilities Act, and one out of, I think, 200. It was done. I mean, that's fine. Let people have their contrary views. That's democracy. But if you can show a reporter that you have talked to them, you've tried to, here's what their argument is, and here's why it's, simply lacks merit, the reporter may be inclined to say, you know what, this is not something I have to include in my story. Where do you hold a media event? You want to hold a news conference or some kind of event, where do you hold it? There are three options. One is if there's a media studio at the legislature or the city hall or in the parliament where you want to raise your story. The second choice is you pick a context appropriate location, like in front of the schoolhouse or in front of a courthouse or whatever it is that you want to have in the backdrop. And the third option is do it virtual only. You issue the news release, you say, we're going to hold it on Zoom, here's the link, log on, and you can hear what we have to say, and you can ask your questions. What's the benefits of each? Um, I love using the Queen's Park Media Studio because of several things. First, it's right there at the legislature. So at least journalists who are dedicated to covering provincial politics may actually be in the building or regularly come in and out of the building. The second advantage of it is they actually have a camera there and an employee of the legislature who videos the news conference, live streams it to the public, and then after the event, we'll provide you with a link to download the video. You don't have to do anything. It's all provided for you. And there's seating for the public or for journalists or your supporters, and it's extremely convenient to use. And the legislature is in a fairly central location. Now, this isn't open to anybody just walk in and use it. It has to be sponsored by a member of the legislature. So you need to develop a relationship with a member of the legislature and then ask if they can book the media studio for a particular time slot that you want. The other advantage, which I've adverted to, is that a reporter who doesn't even attend that news conference can be, they know about the live stream on the legislature's website, they can grab it, watch it, and cover the story. The advantage of a location that is specific to your message, like in front of a school or the Board of Education or something, is you provide that visual backdrop. The disadvantage is that you may have a much harder time getting reporters to physically come there since they are scattered among all sorts of different issues, and it may be out of the way. If you want to circumvent that, you now have the technology to live stream. If you have a smartphone, like I'm using to record these videos, and buy a lavalier mic like I've got on my shirt for these videos, you might be able to set it up, live stream it, and offset the downsides of that location. The advantage of a virtual event only is you don't have to go anywhere. You don't have the logistics of trying to make sure people can get by security at the legislature. You can use as much or as little time as you want. You don't need anyone's permission. And of course, you can post it on, you can live stream it through YouTube and post it online afterwards if you want. The visuals, however, are the worst. They are the least beneficial. Zoom compresses video and audio, and it also, there's no backdrop. It's just whatever you have as your screen backdrop. So let's turn to talking about how you set up a news conference. You pick the date and time. You get to work writing your media advisory that goes out beforehand, and possibly and likely the news release that will go out right afterwards, so that work is all done. I will phone around days before we issue the media advisory. The media advisory will go out the day before, and then maybe again the morning of. But I will phone around to some key reporters and say, by the way, we're going to be doing this. Can I give you the heads up? So that they can put it in their book and their schedule in case they're able to come, or they can mention it to their editor. And then on the actual day, after you've done that setup, the other thing you do is, as I mentioned, if it's in a building like the Queen's Park Legislative Building Media Studio, you've got to give the names of everybody who's coming from your community group. It's good to have an audience there. You bring a few people in who could be, without cheering, your cheering section. They can also be people that the media can talk to afterwards, beyond talking to those of you who spoke up front. Let me talk about the format of a news conference. There are no rules for this, but and do whatever you think works best. But the overall expectation is that 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 people will speak at first, and then it'll open up to question and answer. if you do this kind of event, it is very tight on time, especially if there's going to be 4 people speaking, and if you're each going to speak for 4 minutes, that's 15 minutes. If you're going to run the event for a half an hour and don't want to lose your media audience, you need everybody to be quite ready to be succinct. You may want to script the event in advance so that you have better control. What I've done is I've written up the remarks and circulated to the people who are going to speak, get them to make any changes they want. Be sure you bring a couple of printed copies, because invariably somebody's relying on their phone and their phone runs out of battery, and so on. And in structuring it, use all the persuasion principles I've talked about throughout this course. And specifically, I want to refer to what you do when you're speaking before a legislative committee. Forget the wind-up, get to the pitch. Just dive right into your story. Things that are kind of filler, like thank you all for coming this morning and all that kind of, it doesn't add any value. I've done it. Sometimes you just need to do it to get yourself revved and ready to go. When you're speaking, and if you are scripting the event, it's important to speak in self-contained sound bites. If you want the media to use it, they will routinely use 15 seconds or less, maybe even 10 or 7. So if you've got to air a 30-second clip to just get the point, they are less likely to use it. Who should you have speaking? If it's a particular barrier, it helps to have an individual victim of the barrier who can speak as a person who has suffered from the barrier you're objecting to. Having a leadership figure, somebody who leads a coalition, maybe lead a couple of people, lead a couple of different coalitions. When I'm writing the script, if I'm doing it, I try to anticipate in advance the questions I predictably can expect the journalist to ask, and I try to put the answers in the script. If reporters get to know, if you do enough of these events and they get to know you, and they get to know that you're going to deliver the goods in the text of what's said at the news conference, they're less likely to worry about having to go there and ask questions, because they can expect that the questions are all going to be answered. If there are key documents, we've released an open letter, here's something we're revealing that we obtained from the government, bring hard copies. You may have posted them online, you may have emailed them out, but if you want reporters sitting there to pay attention to them, give it to them so it's right in their hands. Let me talk about answering questions. A general thing I recommend to anyone, whether it's a witness at a court proceeding or anywhere, and that I should follow more often, pause before you answer a question. We have a tendency in conversation, hi, how are you? Fine. We just answer the person right away. We don't pause and say, well, let me think about how I am. But in this circumstance, it helps, even if you wait 5 seconds, to hear the question, think, and then frame your answer. The quality of your answer, whether as a witness or appearing at one of these things, news conferences, in my experience, or talking to the media, improves exponentially for every second you pause. You should anticipate, again, the questions that may come and be ready to have, even if you don't cover them in your actual statement, in the opening statements, be ready with possible answers that you might give. If you're asked a question, you should say whatever you want, whether it's actually responsive to the question or not. It's not too good to look like you're being evasive, but as with what I said about in the 2 lectures ago about giving a parliamentary presentation. If you're asked a question, you can answer in a quick line. You can answer in a quick line and say, just by the way, your question made me think of the following. I want to just add the following. If you're answering a question, give a self-contained answer. What I mean is, the answer should be quotable without hearing the question. Think about the times you've seen statements in the news, television, radio. You rarely hear the question asked. You just hear the statement. And if you want to control what it is you're quoted as saying, make sure the statement is self-contained, that it's clear, um, so that it's quotable. Sometimes you get a question that sort of has within it assumptions you don't agree with. What I will do if I hear that is I'll say, look, you asked me X. That assumes the government's actually done the following. They actually haven't. Had they done it, I would tell you the following. But because they haven't done that, it's important to understand that we haven't faced that situation yet. So let me now turn to the alternative of not having a news conference. Oh, but at the end of the news conference, what you will typically see me do is a couple things. One is get that video for the Queen's Park staffers immediately. We will take steps as quickly as possible to upload it to YouTube. It takes a while, so it will be available to the public. If I have a prefab ready news release, I may read it over one last time and then fire it out right from my computer, and then go somewhere for lunch because I'm exhausted. And of course, there will be reporters who may want to talk to you outside the news conference, or you may get calls afterwards from reporters, so you've got to make sure your time is clear. Here's some alternatives, just a little more on alternatives to doing a news conference. Sometimes just doing a news release is enough. When we've launched the video about the new Toronto courthouse with all the accessibility bungles, all we had to do was send a news release out with a hyperlink to the video, and calls were coming in from the media in no time. By the way, one gift that happened with that story, you can't possibly arrange for this, but it just happened, is later that evening, the Toronto Star ran an article, posted around 10 o'clock, and they included the hyperlink to the video. I'm tracking on YouTube how many views the video is getting, and starting at about 10:05, it started going up 100 views a minute for a couple of hours. Because, why is that? Is it because everybody's going to, at 10 o'clock to the Toronto Star website? Nope. It's because Apple News, which is a news aggregator, happened to include my story about this in its news aggregating. So people look at their iPhone, if they have an iPhone, they look at Apple News, they see the story, they click on it, there's a link to the video, bang, they watch the video. What can you do to do this? You can't control what Apple News decides to include, but when I've done stories in relation to other videos, I have said that I want the, actually, I think that happened with another video, not the new Toronto courthouse. Doesn't matter, the point's the same. It did get a ton of coverage by virtue of that. What I will do is, if I'm doing a story about a video, I will urge a reporter, can you please embed a link to the video in your story? And they get it. It means that somebody reads the story, thinks the video is interesting, they click, and out it goes. The advantage of the news release itself, without a news conference, is it can be, if it's enough to get them to want to cover the story, you get emails. Can you do a Zoom interview? Before the pandemic, no one would have ever accepted Zoom content in a video, in a television news story. Now it's completely acceptable, and you can end up getting interviews done very quickly without having to go anywhere. Other ways to get your story out: social media. Write your story, create your video, post it on social media, and even if you don't send it to the mainstream media, if it picks up enough attention, it may reach enough people, but also it may reach a point where reporters who follow social media tweak to it and want to cover it. If you can't get the media to write your story, or to send a reporter, write it yourself. Offer it as a guest column. I've seen people do that very effectively. I'm delighted that the chain of Metrolinx papers, owned by the Toronto Star around Ontario, have actually approached me about a year ago, I can't remember exactly when, to write a monthly column for them. I don't do it, I don't get paid. It's fine by me. It's just my advocacy. Um, and I ask them their criteria. They tell me their criteria. I write the column, send it in, and it's out there. It's a chance to get attention and to get in media, even when you're not actually dealing with the media, to get a reporter to cover you at all. Let me comment for those watching this who happen to be law students or lawyers about the overlap between advocacy to the media and advocacy to a court. I've touched on this throughout the series of lectures about the interplay between tactics as a lawyer in a traditional court proceeding and strategies doing social justice advocacy. There's no better place where they intersect than here. Um, I am not ethically allowed to assert a fact before a court unless I have evidence to support the fact. I can't cite a proposition of law unless I've got case law to support it, or I tell them I have no supporting case and then say, here are the arguments I have. I am the exact same with journalists. I've had journalists actually ask me, don't you agree that X? And it's something they want me to say, but if I can't say it, if I can't authoritatively say it, I've explained this in an early lecture, I just won't. In other words, I put it is I have said to reporters, before I bring a story to you, I put myself through the same test that you put yourself through before you can give a story to your editor. And that's part of the credibility building process. But it helps beyond that. I've had any number of judges tell me that, judges talk to other judges about lawyers, who was really good, who maybe not so good. And you want credibility as counsel with the court. No brilliant insight on my part. But I got to assume that reporters talk to each other about us too. And I would rather one reporter be able to say to another reporter that you are a credible, authoritative source to bring something to, rather than be careful with that person. If they say things, you better double check it. I will tell you also that all of my strategies that I've given in these lectures about anticipate a possible counter action or response by the government and deal with it in advance, deal with it in your brief, deal with it in your news release, deal with it in your statement at a news conference, very much the same strategy you use in a courtroom. If I'm examining a witness, before I finish examining them, I anticipate the areas of cross-examination. I try to bring them out myself. That's standard courtroom practice, to kind of mute the impact so my opponent can't get up and make some big dramatic revelation. If I'm arguing a case in an appellate court, I will stand up and say, now, here's why we are asserting this position. My opponent opposes us on the following 3 grounds, and I want to answer each of them. I do that before they even get a chance to speak, so that I can try to persuade the judge they're wrong before they get a chance to persuade the judge that they're right. It's totally the same strategy I'm talking about for working with the media, or frankly working with legislators. Oral argument in court, if it's effective, begins with a good headliner. Same with parliamentary hearing presentations. Same, of course, with a news release. The factum should always begin with an overview. I use the same writing style at that part of my factum that I use when I write a news release. My experience writing news releases has made me better at writing overviews for factums. Maybe shorter than a news release, but still the same kind of idea. Let me talk for just a couple of minutes about doing a media interview outside of a major press conference. And it may be an interview that's going live to air, like a radio interview, or it might be an interview where they might later take passages or quotes from it in covering the story. If I'm doing a live interview, on a radio station or a TV station, I always ask, how long is the interview? And then in my head, I do the math. If it's only going to be a 5-minute interview, whatever they ask me, I'm not going to be able to make more than maybe 3 points. I should have the list of points there and a list of added points if we somehow I don't need to make one of them. If the reporter is already on side on a point, actually it's in the introduction, I skip past that point. I don't have a script to read out. And if you hear people on a call on a radio program, especially a current affairs show, if they're reading their statements, you can hear it in their voice. It just doesn't sound very effective. As with anywhere else, anticipate the key points and prepare for them. If it's a really important interview, I'll ask a colleague or friend, interview me, hit me really hard. If you've got points to make, don't feel like you have to wait for the question. As with the turn of phrase I gave just a couple of minutes ago, you could use it here. The host interviews you about X, and you answer about X and say, but there's also another point I think that's really important if I can make it, and it's just the following. Don't go wildly all around so that they feel like you're taking over the interview, but feel free to be flexible in and creative in how to get to the point. If it's a pre-record interview where they're going to use parts of it, sometimes the reporter at the end will say, okay, that's really good. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you'd like to include? Use that opportunity if it's offered. If you do a pre-recorded interview, not a live on-air interview, again, assume that they're going to only use your answers, not the questions. So you should word your answers. If they ask you, what do you think about policy X? Start your question with, don't say, I think it's terrible because. Say, I think policy X is terrible because. One thing I have learned, and may she rest in peace, my mother used to drill it into my head every time I was doing interviews, and it stays with me today. If you're doing a live interview and you are raising an issue of any sort, make sure before the interview is over, you've told the listeners what you want them to do. It's not enough to just say something's wrong. Do some kind of call to action. I did an interview, 30, 40 years ago, and my mother said, you were wonderful, you were brilliant, but you didn't tell us what to do. And so whether it's referring to, we have action tips, our website is X, it'll be, please go to our website and get them to post that with the show notes on air afterwards. Or call your member of the legislature, make sure you ask them to X. Use the platform as an opportunity to get your message out, and make sure no matter what you do, even if you don't get all your points in, you get that in. After I've done an interview, it's not unusual for me I usually ask if they can send me a recording of the interview, and it's not unusual for me to listen to it again. I critique myself. You can always do better. And I find it really helpful to listen to, was I talking too fast? Was I talking too slowly? Did I sound too angry? People don't like angry first thing in the morning when they're brushing their teeth. You may be really upset about what the government's doing, but you might be able to persuade people, but they just don't want to hear someone sound like they're at a megaphone at a protest in front of a legislature when they're brushing their teeth or eating their breakfast. If you're preparing somebody else to do an interview, to answer questions, either on the radio or in a news conference, the most important advice I've given them for any of this that I would encourage, be yourself. Don't try to sound like somebody else. Don't try to sound like what you think somebody giving an interview should. If you're a parent with a child with a disability and facing problems, just be yourself. Talk about your child and what the problems are. Once people do that, they tend to relax and feel more at home. And feel free to rehearse. If you've got someone else doing the interview, not you, feel free to rehearse them. Offer them a couple of words that really work, or turns of phrases that will really help. What do you do if there's an obstructive editor, that you end up with somebody, either a bureau chief or an editor, who's just not interested in your story? Um, the solution is, if it's a big enough news organization, try to find another program that you can get your story to. Try to find another reporter with a different beat. If it's a print newspaper, if they're that resistant, and I've had this happen on occasion, you're not going to get anywhere. Or use the alternative avenues to get your story out that I've talked about, writing an op-ed or guest column, letters to the editor, and so on. If they're just not going to lay it in, you've got to find these alternative avenues. And of course, social media. With that, let me talk for just a couple of minutes on using social media. I love social media. I don't use them all. I use Twitter, I use LinkedIn, I use Facebook, and I'm trying to figure out how to use Blue Sky. The problem I face as a blind person is Instagram is not particularly accessible for me to use. TikTok is not. I need to get other people doing that for us, though it has incredible power potential. And Blue Sky is not pretty with a screen reader, but I'm finding that somebody's come up with some ways around it. Social media has lots of benefits. I know things like Twitter have in some ways degenerated and there are problems, but if you've got followers, or you can get followers, reaching them however you can make a huge, huge difference. We've done Twitter blitzes where we've reached out to members of the legislature. I talked about that, or Parliament, talked about that in an earlier lecture. And I've had more than one politician walk up to me and say, "You guys sure tweet a lot," and which is their way of saying, "We sure tweet a lot." The tone of voice is kind of a mixture of compliment and "you're driving me nuts." But that's fine. That's what we're supposed to do. Sometimes politicians will answer you on social media and you get through to them. If Also, Twitter is a great way to involve, or social media is a great way to involve other people. If you do a post to each member of the legislature in a blitz during an election campaign, and if somebody else wants to do the same, they don't have to compose the tweets. They just have to follow you and click retweet over and over. And so you can empower them. You can double your message, and you can empower them all at the same time by just talking to people, getting them to do that, and then they go click, 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 click. I've been talking too long, and out these go. Social media, as I've mentioned earlier, also can lead journalists to stories. On episode number 7 of our podcast, I talked about how a friend of mine, Ma'ayan Ziv, who had her wheelchair damaged by an airline, she did a video about it on Facebook. She was devastated, and that video went viral. In fact, I got called hours after she posted it. She was on another continent, by CBC saying, there's a woman using a wheelchair whose wheelchair was severely damaged by an airline. Could we get a comment from you? Well, it was that video. It turned out I knew the person, but I didn't know about that it had happened until the reporter approached me. But that video, that video that she shot, this incredibly emotional video, was so powerful that it generated a significant story. If you go to that episode of Disability Rights and Wrongs, the David Lepofsky, episode 7, you'll hear lots about that and how it worked. Crafting a hashtag and message. Hashtags are a short statement using a few letters or a couple of words, but with no spaces and a number sign before. They can be an important way to find supporters. We created a hashtag, we created a social media campaign. We wanted people to take pictures of barriers. This started 10 years ago. in 2016. Take pictures of barriers with their smartphone, post them on Twitter, and use the hashtag AODAFail. AODA stands for the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. Post the picture, describe the barrier in words, and tweet it. Well, what happened was people really picked up on it. Eventually, the word AODA fail became a word. Here's another AODA fail, and so on. But it had other advantages. If you want to find out what other people are tweeting, you just search on Twitter on the hashtag AODA fail, and there you're going to see all the posts. I called a reporter. We got news coverage of the AODA fail campaign. Some next-gen reporters who really like social media thought it was really cool. But on top of that, what happened was I talked to a reporter about an effort we were making, and I said, we keep facing these recurring barriers. And the reporter skeptically said, well, how do I know that? I said, just while I'm on the phone with you, do a search on hashtag AODA fail. And I heard them kind of gasp at the other end of the phone or whatever. When they looked, because there they scrolled down and just saw picture after picture of barrier after barrier, and it had a really powerful impact. You want to come up with a hashtag that says it all. Our friends at the Ontario Autism Coalition did a campaign when there was only funding for certain autism services up to the age of 5, and their hashtag was autism doesn't end at 5. I believe I mentioned that in an earlier lecture. If I didn't, I should have. But in any event, it is the whole message in a hashtag. The advantage of this kind of Picture Our Barriers campaign is that lots of people have smartphones. They come with a camera, and Twitter's free, and you can just go, or whichever social media you use, go and post it. Let me conclude this lecture, and let me conclude these 11 lectures by thanking you for listening. I hope you found them helpful. In terms of media coverage, it's always the luck of the draw. You can have a story that's relatively marginal, and it can actually end up getting a ton of media. You could have an event that you barely planned for at all, and it is an extraordinary success. You could have an event that you work for weeks planning for, and you get a major victory, and it gets no coverage at all. Don't sweat it. One way or other, these activities in advancing a media campaign will help your social justice advocacy. They're going to help you polish your message. They're going to get more people involved in it. And even if reporters don't cover it this time around, they'll be the next time you come back to them. And that's the essence of advocacy. I hope you found these lectures helpful. I would encourage you to check out my podcast, where I keep adding more action tips for social justice advocates, learning from the disability experience, but relevant to everybody. Disability Rights and Wrongs, the David Lepodcast, available on most platforms where you can get a podcast. But I also welcome your feedback. Anything you'd like to ask me about the social justice advocacy tips here, just write me at aodafeedback@gmail.com. aodafeedback@gmail.com. Thanks so much for watching.